Without any further introduction, I will go direct to the point. In his final major theoretical book, From Bacteria to Bach and Back, that's the book of Daniel Dennett. Dennett quotes a striking remark by none other than Karl Marx, what Karl Marx made about Charles Darwin in a letter to his then friend and ally, Ferdinand Lassalle, in early 1861, just over a year after publication of On the Origin of Species. So that's the quote that Dennett makes. It's Marx writing to Lassalle. Not only is the death blow dealt here for the first time to teleology in the natural science, but its rational meaning is empirically explained. This is the most direct and explicit judgment that Marx ever offered about teleology. It's actually a term that he rarely uses. He doesn't talk much about teleology, just this phrase. But the conclusion is clear. He rejects it. Knowingly or not, Marx was echoing almost word by word what his close collaborator, Friedrich Engels, had written to him a year earlier, when the first edition of Darwin's book was still hot off the press. So Engels bought a copy of the very first edition of On the Origin of Species, and 3 weeks later, he was already writing about it to his friend Marx. And he wrote to Marx. Darwin, by the way, whom I'm reading just now, is absolutely splendid. There was one aspect of teleology that had yet to be demolished, and that has now been done. Never before has so grandiose an attempt been made to demonstrate historical evolution in nature, and certainly never to such good effect. There is no doubt that both Engels and Marx took Darwin and his work very seriously. It's no coincidence that it was to Darwin that Engels compared Marx in his graveside speech. Quote, just as Darwin discovered the law of development of organic nature, so Marx discovered the law of the development of human history. This is the words of of Engels in the graveside of Marx in 1883. And in their appraisals of Darwin's contribution to science, both men stressed the same point. Darwin's work was epoch-making because it dealt a death blow to teleology, hence the title of this work, this paper. But then it notes a possible equivocation in Marx's letter. Is Darwin dealing in teleology a death blow, or he explaining its rational meaning empirically? It's doing both, right? Which one is it? Should we eliminate teleology altogether and thus avoid any type of functional talk, or any vocabulary that involves functions and purpose? Or is Darwin giving us a way to, as we say today, to naturalize teleology, incorporating it to modern natural science without the ancient ideology of Intellects, immaterial souls, or Geist in German, thus replacing, I quote Dennett, old-fashioned teleology with new post-Darwinian teleology, as Dennett says. So Marx himself was certainly not interested in proscribing functional talk or in denying the reality of purpose altogether, as he clearly thought that some kind of telos were very real. More on that later at the end of the talk. But I do think there is something deeper, philosophically speaking, here, and that is why Marx talks to Engels about the Book of Darwin as containing, I quote, the natural historical foundation of our outlook. So there is a deep philosophical issue here. What is it? Marx began his intellectual development in a thick Hegelian atmosphere. He's profoundly influenced by Hegel's thought and language, but at the same time make a continuous conscious effort to extricate himself away from the Hegelian spell, especially when it comes to the conception of history. In Hegelian philosophy, as Lisa was interpreted in Marx's time, history is understood as a definite teleological process of progressive development of spirits, kind of a dynamical progression through stages that unfold, propelled by an immanent dialectical logic towards the final end, the full development of self-conscious. As a rational process, it is governed and determined by its end. So spirit develops from being merely, that's the language that Hegel uses all the time. It's a development from the in itself to the for itself, from potentiality to actuality. In Hegel's parlance, history is modeled as an organic process of development, as ontogeny, actually. And that is a metaphor that Hegel uses constantly. An acorn grows into an oak tree. Right? A caterpillar becomes a butterfly, this kind of thing. Hegel is profoundly teleological in a tradition that can be traced back to Aristotle. Aristotle famously made this paradigm of intellechy. The oak is the telos of the acorn. The end goal, the fully actualized self-conscious Geist, is implicit from the very beginning, guiding the process, just as the acorn's entire purpose and destiny is to become the oak tree. But that is precisely what Marx sought to repudiate, his distancing himself to this kind of view. He firmly rejected a teleological view of history, criticizing, for instance, in the German Ideology, which is a work that was not published during Marx's lifetime, but he was criticizing what he calls the speculative distortions in which later history is made the goal of earlier history, right? And denouncing the so-called historical presentation of development that rests on the fact that the latest forms regards the previous one as steps leading up to itself. So that's what Marx is criticizing, distancing himself. The materialist conception of history was nothing other than Marx's argument against adopting some kind of intentional stance per Dennett toward history. History has no reasons on its own. It has causes, but no reasons. It is not guided by ideals. It may have tendencies, but no predetermined direction. Social and economic structures evolve out of contradictions in material life, not from the unfolding of a preordained idea or divine plan. As in Darwinian evolution, there is no such a thing as predetermined goal. Marx, of course, was developing his conception of history well before he's ever heard of Darwin. Yet, just like Darwin, he's not always consistent. He's developed this idea, but he not always is following this idea, right? His language and habits of thought remained impregnated with Hegelian teleology, even as it's clearly rejected conceptually at the conscious level. In the introduction of the Grundrisse, also unpublished, Marx made these very famous claims that the human anatomy contains the key to understand the anatomy of the ape, which is a kind of a Hegelian mode of view, right? Not Darwinian. The anatomy of the human does explain nothing about the anatomy of the ape, of course. The metaphor illustrates the view that the most development form of society retrospectively clarify earlier stages, or maybe even justify early stages. But this analysis is not evolutionary at all in the Darwin sense, right? It is developmental in the Hegelian sense. Just as the embryos develop into the adult organism, so history unfolds through stages culminating in a higher form that reveals the truth of what came before. It's Hegelian thought. Darwin's Origins of Species introduced a radically different model, evolution without purpose. Species change not because they are oriented toward telos, but because contingent variations are selected by environmental, local, and relative pressures. There is no end toward which evolution aims, only continual local adaptation and contingent branching. For Marx and Engels, this was a revelation. Just as the species evolve through struggle and adaptation, societies transform through class conflict and contradictions within material life. Darwin's model appeared to validate the anti-teleological thrust of Marx's critique of Hegel. History is not the realization of some idea, but the outcome of immanent material process. In this sense, to borrow a phrase from Dennett, Darwin's works, in fact, represented a powerful, strange inversion of reasoning. The traditional order of explanation was turned upside down, even if both Marx and Darwin continued to struggle with old habits of teleological thought. What was needed and what had already begun in the work of this type of materialist conception was what John Dewey explicitly argued for, a revolution in philosophy itself. So, to John Dewey now. For Dewey, the publication of Darwin's book precipitated a crisis in thought, in philosophy, not only in biology, in philosophy, in metaphysics, right? The book is a protest not only against religious idea and sentiments. It's not the heart of the issue. It's secondary to Dewey. That is the least important part. The real issue is scientific and philosophical. It expresses a challenge to the long dominant, I quote, Dewey, of teleological thinking. So here's the quote of Dewey. Consider how men were impressed by the facts of life. Their eyes fell on certain things, slight in bulk and frail in structure. To every appearance, dispersive things were inert and passive. That's the acorn that will turn into an oak tree, for instance. Suddenly, under certain conditions, these things, henceforth known as seeds, eggs, germs, begin to change rapidly in size, form, and qualities. Rapid and extensive change occur. However, in many things, as when wood is touched by fire, so rapid change can occur. For instance, when wood is burned. But the changes in the living things are different. They are orderly. They are cumulative. They tend constantly in one direction. They are directional. They do not, like other changes, destroy or consume or press fruitless in wandering flux. They realize, they fulfill. Each successive stage, no matter how unlike its predecessor, preserves its net effects and also prepares the way for a full activity on the part of its succession. It's the concept of Hegel we call Aufhebung. So it was transcend and preserve something, right? In living beings, change do not happen as they seem to happen elsewhere, any which way. The earlier changes are regulated in view of later results. This progressive organization does not cease till there is achieved a true final term, a telos, a completed, perfected end. So here's Dewey is describing the teleological way of thinking, right? And that is what Darwin is destroying. Aristotelian philosophy generalized from that, Dewey argues, I quote, nature as a whole is a progressive realization of purpose, strictly compared to the realization of purpose in any single plant or animal. For centuries, the development process of organism provided the primary model for which thinkers explain change, order, and organization in the universe. Growth seemed inherently teleological. The acorn did not just become anything, but specifically an oak. Right? It has a goal. This imagery of immanent purpose became the dominant metaphor not only for biology, but for history and metaphysics. Darwin's intervention for Dewey shattered this imagery. It destroys. That's why it's so powerful. What his theory demonstrated was that change could be explained without recourse to final causes or inherent ends. Variations were not guided by a predetermined outcome. They were sifted by environmental pressures with results that were maybe cumulative but not preordained in any sense. Evolution replaced development. A logic of adaptation and contingent displaced the old model of purposeful unfolding. From Dewey's perspective, the true significance of Darwin's work was therefore philosophical. So this test of Dewey that I'm quoting is the influence of Darwinism in philosophy. So Darwin's works is already philosophy. Right? It undermined the long-standing assumption that order in nature must be explained through teleology. In its place, Darwin introduced what Dewey called a genetic and experimental logic, which foresaw the search for ultimate ends in favor of investigating concrete processes for which forms of life and thought, because Dewey is including epistemology in the discussion, forms of life and thought arise, persist, and change. In this way, Darwin inaugurated a profound transformation in thought. He compelled philosophy to abandon the search for absolute finalities and to reorient itself toward historical process, contingents, and particular conditions. For Dewey, there was the crisis, and at the same time the opportunity that Darwin brought to philosophy, to dissolve the teleological framework that had dominated Western thought. So Darwin's dangerous idea, as Dennett called it in his book, Darwin's Dangerous Idea, is indeed like a universal acid. A universal acid corrodes everything. It changes the philosophical scenario. I quote Dewey to that. Doubtless, the greatest dissolvent, this universal acid, in contemporary thought of old questions, the greatest precipitant of new methods, new intentions, new problems, is the one affected by the scientific revolution that found its climax in the origin of species. Well, now talking about revolutions. So I would bring one last name to our game, right? It's Thomas Kuhn in the structure of revolution, the structure of scientific revolutions. Yeah. If Darwin undermined teleology in biology, Thomas Kuhn extended the same challenge into the field of philosophy of science. That's the very last pages of his classical book of 1962, The Structure of Scientific Evolution. Kuhn's target was what historians had long taken for granted. Sometimes we call it a weak conception of science, kind of a triumphalist, a progressive narrative that reads the past as if it had always been striving toward the present and the future. In such stories, early theories are portrayed chiefly as failure to anticipate what we now know, while modern science is cast as the culmination of a progressive development that was in some sense inevitable. Kuhn's polemic was that this image of scientific progress is smuggled into historiography, precisely the same kind of teleology that Darwin had banished from biology. As he himself remarked, that is a long quote at the very end of the structure of scientific revolution. The conceptual transposition here recommended in his book is very close to one that the West undertook just a century ago. He's writing mid-20th century, so a century after Darwin. It's particularly helpful because in both cases, the main obstacle to the transposition is the same. When Darwin first published his theory of evolution by natural selection in 1859, what most bothered many professionals was neither the notion of species change nor the possible descent of man from apes. That was not the issue that bothered people, right? So he's doing the same diagnostic. No, people were not angry with Darwin for religion's reason. There is something philosophically deeper here. It is the attack on teleology. The difficulty stemmed from an idea that was more nearly Darwin's own. Common descent was not a Darwinian idea, right? All the well-known pre-Darwinian evolutionary theories had taken evolution to be a goal-directed process. The idea of man and of the contemporary flora and fauna was thought to have been present from the first creation of life, perhaps in the mind of God. The idea or plan, so here, again, this notion that the idea controlled the process, a plan controlled the process, have provided the direction and guiding force to the entire evolutionary process. Each new stage of evolutionary development was a more perfect realization of a plan that had been present from the start. For many men, the abolition of that teleological kind of evolution was the most significant and least palatable of Darwin's suggestion. So here's the crux of the issue, the heart of the problem. What Darwin proposed and what Kant sought to import into the philosophy of science was precisely this abolition of teleological evolution. As Kuhn says, even the most intricate adaptation, such marvelous adapted organs as the eye and the hand of man, organ whose design had previously provided powerful argument for the essence of a supreme artifice and advanced plan. I don't have this quote. Okay. Were products of a process that moved steadily from primitive beginnings, but toward no goal. From somewhere, but not toward somewhere. From primitive beginnings toward no goal at all. What could evolution, development, and progress mean in the absence of an specified goal? To many people, such terms suddenly seemed self-contradictory. I think this is an important thing that Kuhn is trying to draw our attention to. But I'll come back to that in a minute. For Kuhn, the historiography of science had remained stuck in a pre-Darwinian mode of thought. Kuhn insisted instead that scientific change is not simply the unfolding of a predetermined rational order, but an episodic, discontinuous, contingent process, structured by crises, anomalies, and paradigm shifts. So, what Kuhn is saying is that the products of science move steadily from primitive beginnings, but toward no goals. So this parallel between Darwin's idea and Kuhn's notion of the growth of knowledge in science is made even more explicit in Kuhn's, almost his last reading work. It's a talk by the end of his life called The Road Since the Structure in the beginning of the 90s. And that's what he wrote there. I think it's a beautiful image here. Scientific development must be seen as a process driven from behind, not pulled from ahead. So he's trying to make a contradistinction, a contrast between processes that are driven from behind, like they are pushed from behind, and teleological process, they are pulled from ahead. And I think this is not evolution from, but not evolution toward. Okay? So, driven from behind, evolution from, not pulled from ahead, evolution towards something. So that's the distinction that Kuhn wants to clarify. Here Kuhn finally names the conception transposition, a new sense of evolution that must be sharply distinguished from development. So we have this type of words like evolution, development, progression, that for a long time were used interchangeably as meaning more or less the same thing, right? And each word like evolution, development, progression, they all have this progressive connotation, obviously, implying a teleological unfolding from potential to fulfillment. Right? In this older vocabulary, to evolve was essentially to develop, to realize a goal present from the beginning, much as an acorn mature into an oak tree, in the famous Hegel metaphor. So Darwin's revolution shattered this conflation. Development may describe such a goal direction maturation, but evolution in a specific sense, in the Darwinian sense, names a contingent open-ended process driven from behind, but not pulled from ahead. By variation and circumstance, not pulled by any preordained end. Kuhn's achievement was to transfer this Darwinian logic in the history of science, dismantle the weak assumption of necessary march toward truth, and recasting progress as an evolutionary process. In this sense, Kuhn's epistemology, which he himself in this last article calls, I quote, a sort of post-Darwinian Kantianism. So that's what Kuhn is calling his position. It's a kind of Kantianism, but a post-Darwinian one. Kantian after Darwin. Conceptuology echoes John Dewey's hope that Darwin's revolution will dissolve inherent metaphysical assumptions and reframe the entirety of philosophy on a non-teleological grounds. By importing the Darwinian distinction between development and evolution into the philosophy of science, Kuhn is not only challenging the triumphalist historiography, but also fulfill Dewey's program, showing that even knowledge itself must be understood as historical, contingent, experimental, rather than as the gradual realization of a timeless end. So that's it. No. One last section. So that was the main idea. That's what I wanted to say. The conclusion is history, natural history, as in the origin of species, human history, as in the materialist conception of history, and even the history of thought and science, as in Kuhn's theory, even though I'm not fully convinced of this last case, to be clear. But maybe even the history of science and history of thought is evolutionary, not developmental. Evolutionary, not development. This is a distinction that I tried to make in the last section. History is not guided. It has no purpose. But in the case of Darwinian evolution by natural selection, you don't need to get rid of functional talk. This kind of talk is easily naturalized, at least as Dennett argues for. So Dennett is saying we don't need to get rid of functional talk, we can just reinterpret in Darwinian terms. You can even talk about design, Dennett would say. Not the semblance of design, not even the mere appearance of design, but real design in nature. Design produced, however, by an automatic, non-intentional, non-purposeful process. But design, nonetheless, yet design. It does sound strange to our deeply teleological little minds. I want to say that to our minds. So we are used to think in teleological terms. Maybe we are even hardwired to think in teleological terms. So anyway, old habits die hard, including habits of thought. So our little teleological little minds, to our minds, it sounds strange that there is design without purpose. But there is, and Darwin just explained how this could be. No mystery there. Even though we, just like Marx, and just like even Darwin sometimes, we can occasionally slip back into the traditional ways of thinking, because maybe we are hardwired to think like that. It certainly comes easy to us, so we think easy in teleological terms. I think two residual issues remain, though. Two particularly hard nuts to crack. So that's here I think it's more complicated. That may force us to recognize local teleological process in nature. That is, natural purpose. Natural purpose here I'm using this Kantian sense, Naturzweck, right? So that Kantian using this in his third critic. Even after we abandon any kind of comprehensive cosmic metaphysical teleology, which I think we should abandon, any kind of cosmic comprehensive teleology. But local teleology, I think it's harder to get rid of. So the first issue, of course, is development itself. I was drawing this distinction between evolution and development. And I was saying, history, evolution is not developmental. But is development developmental? It certainly looks like a guided, regulated process oriented toward a specific end. And we now usually explain this guided character in a teleonomic fashion, using concepts like blueprint, program, code, information, right? It is this pre-existing information already contained in the egg, in the acorn, that appears to control or guide the unfolding of the process of development. but here we are back to the Hegelian in itself, right? So the manifest become actual through ontogeny. Some authors, I'm here thinking specifically about Susan Oyama. She's very critical of this informational talk. He thinks it is insufficiently materialistic. It is still like ideals guiding some process, even though it's portrayed as a molecule, as DNA, right? So, but it sounds, in a sense, still homuncular, still like a subject is guiding this process. Her developmental system theories offers a corrective, right? Instead of thinking of development as the unfolding of what's already latent, think of it more akin to ecological succession. So let's try to think development as ecological succession. With predictable results, but from the multiple interaction factors, with no guiding plan, just like in ecology. For my part, I remain uncertain. Development process seems to be more reliable, more canalized, more constrained into a specific trajectory than the metaphor of ecological succession suggests. So I think we should know. It's an open question for me. The second, and that's how I'm ending this talk. The second is cognition, and in particular the problem of agency. What is agent and how you naturalize agents? Organisms, I'm sure, are natural systems, but they are very peculiar kinds of natural systems with a unique relation to time and to future. I would say that organisms are future-oriented systems. They are anticipatory systems. I think we need to unfold this, but that's not the time. Okay, so, and here's why I'm linking this to cognition and try to connect the problem of agency to the problem of cognition, because organisms seem to use internal models. Maybe models are not only something that humans do, but that organisms do in a general sense. But organisms seem to use internal models to guide behavior and act to alter what lies ahead, what hasn't happened yet, what's in the future. In some sense, organisms do things. They engage in actions. They are active systems. They are agents. Okay, so it's a problem, right? This kind of teleological behavior is most obvious, and I think it's most developed in human conscious action, which I think it's a real problem, because how we put together human conscious within a general scientific image of the world. How we can fit this kind of peculiar, particular behavior that humans do in a naturalistic, non-mystical, non-dualistic system of thought. So to close, I will be back. Let us once again return to Marques and his famous passage on Capital about the architect and the bees. I don't know. I'm not sure if you already hear this passage, but it's a famous passage by Marques, and say that there is something special about humans, right? So Marques says, a spider conducts operation that resembles those of a weaver. A bee puts to shame many an architect in the construction of her cells. They do really beautiful, sophisticated design, but that's not a problem. Darwin already told us how to do that kind of thing. But what distinguishes the worst architect from the best of bees is this, that the architect raises his structure in imagination before he erects it in reality. At the end of every labor process, we get a result that already existed in the imagination of the labor at its commencement. He not only affects a change of form in the material on which he works, but he also realizes a purpose of his own. So at least some natural systems are strong teleological systems. And I think we are strong teleological systems. For Marx, of course, history as a whole has no purpose. It's not a subject, it's not an agent. History is not an agent, history is not a subject. But individual humans do have purpose. They act purposefully. There is nothing magical about this. Marx, of course, is a materialist. Humans are fully part of nature, they have a natural history, and as animals, they are the result of a non-purposeful process, just like everything else in the organic realm. Their capacity to form goals and realize them is itself a natural phenomenon, one that emerged under particular evolutionary and historical conditions. This, finally, is where a naturalistic conception of teleology must lead us. The existence of local, emergent purpose does not restore the old metaphysical of final causes. Explain how they arise without appeal to the transcendence. In that sense, its rational meaning is empirically explained, as Mark talked in the beginning. So I'll finish by quoting myself here, as I wrote some years ago, that some material objects allow naturally explanation by final causality does not imply that all natural objects have a final cause. Natural purpose, Naturheitswerk in this Kantian sense, Kantian holds, are quite particular type of material systems, and I will say they have a quite particular historic specific trajectory. They don't simply fall from the sky. And it's completely plausible that this type of specific organization is only manifest in a very limited range of physical phenomena. That's this range that is actually teleological. Teleology, then, is not a cosmic principle. There is no such a thing as a comprehensive teleology, but a local achievement. The contingent teleology itself is the contingent result of natural process that, without foresight, without plan, without design, produced beings capable of having true purpose. That's it. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. We have almost 15 minutes for questions.
Just a comment. I have comments, but I prefer to give my talk first, and then we can discuss later, because otherwise I will mention myself. And but thank you for your presentation, Victor. I think we will have a lot to talk about.
Interesting.
Okay, a lot of suspense. So.
Yeah, I'll definitely try to restrict the discussion here, but isn't one of the problems the concept of goal? Because if you say that the goal is the form, that's something achieved, of course there is no direction towards the form. But if the goal is to exist with what you have, that's the only thing that is continued throughout life's evolution. So if the goal is to exist with whatever you have, and what you have changes because of chance and because of neutral processes, then the goal has always been local and has always continued to be the same. So maybe the problem is the concept of goal.
Yeah, what I think we are all agreeing is that there's no such a thing as overall time-independent goal, like a transcendent goal or something like this, orienting history, right? But I think that organisms do have goals. I'm not sure organizational closure is enough to a system to have goal, right? I think maybe it needs some more cognitive machinery to model something and try to achieve something. And I think a cell already does that. In that broad sense, cells are already cognitive agents. They are modeling the world and trying to, they guide the behavior by anticipation.
there is some invariance there in its action. So maybe if you picture the goal as some invariant principle of existence of a cell or any living system.
Any physical system, any living system?
Any living system, not physical system.
Not physical system, any living system. But
Yeah.
any living system as they exist now, or because
No, any time.
any time. But then what is the definition of life?
Do I get a talk or?
No, the thing is, I think that.
But don't you see some invariance?
No, okay.
That's my question. You see the invariance in the goal.
What
you call like a local teleology couldn't be like a goal invariance in the local sense.
Yeah, what I'm trying to think about here is that just permanence, stability, I wouldn't call that a goal, right? And maybe life persists by self-reproducing and, closure of constraints in that sense, right? But I wouldn't say that this is a goal. This is just persistence. But then through natural selection, life builds up mechanisms of agency.
Before natural selection, you have already neutral. Anyway,
that's what I'm not sure about. Yeah.
There's way too much to discuss on that.
Yeah,
front.
I used to thought that first you have like autopoiesis, like it's already cognition, and then you evolve. I'm more and more inclined to a vision that the organization of life and the possibility of evolution, evolvability, co-evolve together. Right? There's not one and then the other. And along this line, there is not anymore because we don't have this kind of systems, right? But they used to, in historical time, there was a kind of gray area. I'm not sure if this is alive or not, or if this is cognitive or not, or even if that is evolving or not, because evolution itself evolves, right? I would say that. I would say the conditions of evolution evolve, and the conditions of something to be an organism in a strict sense, an autopoietic system, already involves evolution.
I'll discuss with you in person.
Okay.
But I have been trying to develop a concept of development as an anticipatory system.
Okay, that's cool.
That's exactly what I wrote before you called cognition an anticipatory system.
Yeah.
We must discuss that as well.
Of course.
Okay, I think you will need many coffee breaks to
To discuss that. I think Paulo is
yeah.
Ito, thank you very much for the talk. I just want to check a point of your reasoning. When, as far as I could understand, when you mentioned Marx and you talk about histories made by teleological agents, which are the humans, but the historical process itself, it's not goal-directed. Is that so? What you meant, or not?
I think there is
because
there's a particularity in Marx. I think Marx thinks that for most of the time, humans are doing history, but they don't know they are doing. They're not doing as agents, right? They are objects of history. They are suffering history. At the same time, on the political level, there is in Marx this kind of project of conscious history, conscious history making, right? So, but it would be some very recent thing. So, yeah, they are teleological agents, but they're not doing history teleologically. But maybe someday we will do history teleologically.
Sure, like foundation, something like that. But and I'm trying to understand your concept of local teleology. And so, do you see any difference with this explanation of human history and the explanation we can provide to evolutionary history of any organism? Take an organism as a teleological system and the evolutionary process itself are not goal-directed.
Yeah, it's the same thing. Yeah.
It's the same. So when you say local teleology and limited range of phenomena, you are talking about all the organisms in the world. So
organisms are local teleological systems. Yes.
Okay. Because, well, at least for biologists, call life a limited range of phenomena. I mean, in physical sense, I understand what you mean. It's a very particular and very improbable regime.
Yeah, but the thing is that,
you see my point?
like teleological systems are suffering evolution, history, but this history itself is not teleological.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, but that's the point. That's the local because it's on the parts, not on the process, on the whole of the process, right?
So I think I got your point. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, we still have time for 2 short questions.
Okay, so thank you very much, Victor. I do appreciate the distinction between a global and a local teleology. And overall, I think I like the beginning of your talk when you said perhaps it's not coherent, right? Perhaps Darwin is oscillating, and another level of it would be Darwin's own declarations on it. But I have just a really small punctual question on the notion of design, because we were saying, well, we can make paraphrases of something eliminating teleology, and you said something as we can have design without purpose. But design, because language is something important when we are talking about teleology. If you are talking about using design as a category, this evokes the designer, right? Or if you say we can have design without purpose, but so it's not real design. What do you mean by this? I was confused.
This is a complicated thing for several reasons. And the first of all is that I'm not sure about that, right? So maybe you're just right. And I used to think strongly like that we shouldn't use design because that implies a designer, right? But I think Dennett has a point. Maybe he's wrong. So I'm deferring this discussion to is Dennett right or wrong, right? And we can treat it as a separate part. And he's just saying that, well, there is a process that acts like a designer, but it has no purpose, and it's evolution by natural selection, and that is sufficient to naturalize functional thought. That's Dennett talking. I'm not sure if I agree with that. But well, Dennett is more smart. It's smarter guy than I am. I think so. He deserved at least the discussion. Yeah. I think it's not a crazy position, right? And his point is a good one, because in nature, in organic nature, we see intricate order, right? That could not appear randomly, spontaneously, right?
Yeah, but order
and
is not design.
Well, okay, but what Dennett would say is, so which fights do you want to pick? Do you want to convince people that there's no design in nature, or that there is some process that does design but is not a designer? That's what Dennett would say. And his fight against creation, of course.
Last question, please.
Bom, eu vou pedir perdão, eu não me expresso muito bem em inglês, então vou fazer a pergunta em português. A minha pergunta é sobre a ideia de teleologia e o paralelo entre a história da ciência, a história natural e a história no sentido do Marx. A ciência, ao contrário das outras fenômenos, é uma atividade racionalmente orientada, né? Para o Kuhn, dentro do paradigma, muito claramente existe progresso, né? Resolução de quebra-cabeças. Então, dentro do paradigma, muito claramente existe um progresso na ciência. Mas para ele parece que não existe um progresso nas revoluções, overall, no sentido das revoluções. Porém, se você perguntar para os cientistas que estão num paradigma que ganhou uma revolução, eles vão dizer, o nosso paradigma ganhou a revolução porque ele é uma descrição mais adequada da realidade. E é assim que a gente normalmente entende...
revolutionaries say they are better than the
Exato, perfeito. Mas é que existe uma ideia de que a ciência é uma atividade racionalmente orientada, com o objetivo de buscar uma descrição verdadeira da realidade. Algumas pessoas não gostam da palavra verdade, então eu posso usar uma verossimilhança ou uma adequação empírica, uma descrição. Eu queria entender mais a sua visão em relação a isso. Parece que você concordou com a visão do Kuhn, não sei se ficou claro, mas eu queria entender como que você vê isso. Se a ciência é diferente da história natural e da história, e ela é uma atividade racionalmente orientada para a descrição da verdade ou não? Como que você vê isso?
Well, that's another point that would defer to further discussion because, as I said when I was reading, I said, oh, history, natural history, human history, and even the history of science, although I'm not fully convinced of the last case, right? So that was my disclaimer. And the reason is because, well, science is done by rational agents, right? They are explicitly teleological agents in the sense of Marx that's realize a purpose of his own, right? So I'm not sure about it. Again, I think Kuhn, but I wanted to bring Kuhn because he, more than anyone that I ever read, draws this very neat distinction between a process driven from behind and a process pulled from ahead. I think it's a very good image to try to contrast these two kind of process, right? And he's applied this scheme to the history of science. I'm not sure if he should do that, but in any sense, he's recognizing that the philosophical contribution of Darwin and the reason that this generated so much heated debate is because it's a deep metaphysical question, right? And it's about teleology in its center.
Muito obrigado.
Thank you.